Club Crazy. An original story by Bryson Kilmer. Inside a modest home, with antique furniture stuffed in all the corners and along walls, the president of a club stood as straight as his hunched shoulders would allow. He cleared his throat too many times before finally addressing the members. First, I would like to announce my new book coming out next month. At the head of a large oval table, he took a deep breath and paused, his left arm trembling. How to Rejuvenate the Senile Mind? He chuckled and said, Almost. Forgot the title. A younger Tara, but not by much, with all gray hair, the club's treasurer, leaned back and rolled her eyes. Suddenly, she opened them wide, covered her yawning mouth, and sat upright, sneaking looks around the table to see if anyone noticed her rude reaction. After the president finished listing the highlights of his upcoming self-help book, Tara finally appeared relaxed. Not more than a few breaths later, the president, with his 10-pack-a-day smoker voice, grumbled on about the first chapter. Somewhere lost within the beginning of his book, Tara stared straight ahead like a starving person, even though the table was covered with goodies and a range of teas from South Africa to China. Sarah, the secretary, struggled to scribble down the president's words. Tara tapped Sarah's writing arm and shook her head at the complete waste of time. Sarah stopped and glared at her, then brought her attention back to the president. After a brief pause, the secretary started taking notes again, but soon quit after he described too many details, even repeating similar phrases. Suddenly she felt hypnotized, struck with vertigo, either from his voice or from the topic, and she had a hard time keeping a solid grip on the pen, so instead she chewed on a sugar cookie and fixated on a hanging painting across from her. The brain is not a fragile, wrinkled intestine, intertwined in a floating bowl of liquid, but a muscle that can be strengthened. The president droned on with a smile, as if a secret audience were chuckling at his wit. At the other end of the table, the librarian's chin slipped through supporting hands, and his head jerked back upright just before he split his chin on the tabletop. Larry's eyes flew open, and he raised a pale hand, then whacked the side of his round head. Excuse me? Reading and solving word problems aren't the only ways to fortify brain tissue. The president seemed to have finally registered Larry's words, but he forged ahead anyway. I have a few more significant points to... We have a lot of issues to cover, and I have to leave by 4. Larry looked at everyone sitting around the table, all 11 heads nodding except for one, the standing monotone speaker. Seated across from him, he noticed Raj's quick nods and the tablecloth moving in front of him. Alarmed, Larry leaned down and glanced under the table at Raj's eager, bouncing knee. He was glad that the tablecloth situation was innocent, but mainly, he wished he had brought several ankle weights to Velcro around that annoying leg. Besides his leg, his irritating, hyperthyroid eyes made Raj look so intense, but the ladies loved to comment over his long eyelashes, a sympathetic reaction, he felt. At least Raj did not try to take over the meeting, again. Well, my book is very important, but I can see your point. He glanced at a few people, sat down, and winced at his complaining muscles. I will send everyone an email with my exciting blurb and where to buy my book. He put on his reading glasses and said, Let's open with old business. Nothing more needed to be said. Everyone sat still and stared at the vice president. Flowing below the edge of the table, Veronica's straight black hair encased her slender frame as she sat. Finally, the vice president parted a lock of shiny hair with a long fingernail starting at the temple and intentionally sliding it all the way down to her hip. Raj gawked and followed the parting strands from top to bottom, while a few seats over, Tara looked as if she had bitten into a spoiled appetizer. Far more than a glance, Raj gazed down the hallway at the doors leading to Veronica's bedrooms. Deep in thought, the vice president puckered her lips seductively and said, I did talk to our newest member, Daisy. She's not a daisy, Jeff said, full of scorn, 2 seats away. More like a petunia. He always seemed winded because his cheeks and nose were flushed all the time, but the redness never faded. Mostly laughs cackled around the table, although there were a couple silent open jaws, but nobody rolled their eyes. Daisy is a person, Veronica tried to make her last few words sound firm, even scolding. "She's more like arrogant, rude," commented Larry. Tara spoke up. "She's been telling our guests how disorganized our board members are and scaring off all the visitors from our meetings." At one end of the table, a few people described Daisy's worst attributes, while those at the other end mocked the absent woman's stuffy attitude. Many felt that she acted like a person who was making millions of dollars and had screaming fans fainting at her feet. Members at the middle of the table held a discussion about confronting Daisy, kicking her out, and throwing those pompous books on top of her, a bit off but very intense. High on the wall, a clock went. Cuckoo, cuckoo, and a melody played. But the busily chatting people failed to notice. Not involved in the debates, knee-bobbing Raj kept listening to the conversations and waited for his chance to unleash the details of his committee. "Stop the sidebar conversations!" The president waved his hands at the unruly bunch. The members managed to quiet down, even though they slipped in a few more derogatory details before yet another animated discussion developed. The president put his finger to his lips, but more small groups continued to murmur their feelings. He put his hand out and flapped it up and down, trying to silence the growing clamor. One cluster became louder, and he shushed them. Another group across the table began an even more animated character blast against Petunia. "Quiet down!" The president's hands kept flailing at the entire board, as if he were at a circus game, the one where heads bobbled up and down through holes in a tabletop, requiring the player to smack them with a large, soft mallet before they quickly ducked. Silence. The group stared at him as if he had cussed them out, but the conversations did stop. Veronica, continue. "As I was saying," she flipped her hair and tried to keep her voice calm, "Daisy is just trying to make the club more efficient." "By scaring away visitors and members?" asked Larry. Veronica folded her arms and asked, "Who has seen Daisy scare anyone?" "More like who hasn't seen Petunia scare off someone?" "I have, and more than once," repeated around Veronica's table, and the sidebars regained momentum with vigor. 3 group discussions with 3 similar subjects grew in volume just as before. Wishing he had brought a soft mallet, the president grabbed the next best thing, a spoon, and tapped it against the table. No one stopped bickering, so he quickly raised the utensil like a gavel, at which point the spoon flew from his grip and clanged against a glass china hutch on the wall behind him, cracking the antique glass door. Everyone froze, shocked at his violent response, and watched Veronica's reaction while the president tried to regain control of the conversation. "I'll fix it," he said, with his pointer finger up, an insider's joke often used by writers as a response to a critique. He simmered with embarrassment while he brushed his hair back, wrestled with his collar, and mouthed a sorry to Veronica. "We need to keep this meeting on track," he said to the rest of the group. Veronica's mouth clenched with lockjaw, and her eyes stayed transfixed on the unreplaceable fractured great-grandmother's glass. "I will talk to Daisy," said a brave soul, the first time Helen had spoken tonight, since her polite greetings. She was the only person at the table who had kept her sweater on, a plain, checkered, hand-stitched garment. "I second the motion to have Helen talk with Daisy," Sarah said, without hesitation. "Aye," struck out around the table, with the speed of data buzzing through a computer. Everyone was synchronized for the first time, except for Nervous Knee, who acted like the curious cat, fidgeting to see what was in the hole of the nearby baseboard. Hands reaching to the ceiling, Larry asked, "What will you tell her?" "What I would want anyone to say to me." Her hands jerked forward twice in a stabbing motion, as if challenging him to disagree. Surprised by her intense overreaction, he shrugged and looked around the room, but unbelievably, everyone else seemed satisfied. Larry shoved both hands back down against his sides and leaned back, a white surrender flag waving in his eyes. So, now where are we at? Four women, with at least 55 years of experience of teaching English among them, shouted in unison, "Where are we?" His head jerked back as if struck by the grammar rules, and his chair tipped dangerously back, sending him to the floor. Where all linguistic vandals are meant to end up. Two of the grammar gurus stood and walked in his direction, while continuing to describe the rule of not ending a sentence with a preposition. They lectured with so much passion and clear descriptions that several members swore they had fire breath and more like 100 years of combined experience. By the look on Larry's face, he had heard the rule before. His only hope to redeem his bad habit relied on enough people misusing the phrase that the university professors would finally change the rule. Job security for some, and a break for Larry. After rubbing his lower back, Larry positioned himself in the middle of his seat. Embarrassment heated his face from either his English structure or falling. "All right then, where are we?" He smiled widely, and the group joined him, to his relief. These moments not only made animated writing material, but also entertained most of the members who thrived on club issues like a reality show in one's own neighborhood. Next on the list, book signing at the Fair Oaks Library. The president looked around the table, and everyone finally seemed to be paying attention. Who volunteers to organize this event? At second glance, he noticed almost all eyes were glued to the agenda list as if they had forgotten an important detail. He observed sweating Brent with his usual unreadable blank stare, the only one bravely making eye contact with him. "Brent, do you volunteer?" Even though Brent wrote exceptionally well, his awkwardly spoken words were always mumbled and hard to hear. At club meetings, if there were a cave at the back of the room, he would be the one inside, watching, learning, and writing about everyone's crazy interactions. A person would only shake hands with him once, since even antibacterial soap proved inefficient at removing the primordial ooze of his clammy handshake. He didn't care, because many outcasts have evolved into watchers of society, becoming great writers about humanity's hypocrisies. Brent looked over his shoulder, struggling because of his overweight issue, to make sure he had not raised his hand. I can't do that." Unrecognizable mumbles about some excuse followed like an asylum patient after an injection. "It won't take but a few hours, so I need you to meet the library director tomorrow at 4. The president smiled and wrote a check mark on his agenda sheet. "Any questions, Brent?" "Well, I'm not sure. Hot. Tara will give you all the details." He read the next item. New business. Standing tall, Raj locked eyes with everyone one at a time and said, "I have the details. I have the details. I have the details. I have the raffle replacement next," blurted the president. After a childish grunt, Raj sat, then struggled internally before standing again, saying, "Can we do the club's conference now?" After he sat back down, his knee continued its lively ritual. "Oh." The president glanced around the room. "Sure. Great." Raj stood again and handed Tara, sitting next to him, a stack of handouts. "Could you pass these out to everyone?" "Yes." She started giving out the printed pages. "Now, on line 5, we have an important decision to make, and on line 10, I would like to know what everyone thinks." Veronica's hand flew up. "Wait, we haven't gotten the papers yet," she said, with such disdain that everyone stared at her, then Raj, and waited for the fireworks. But he didn't react, just said, "Oh, right." Some of the attendees glanced at each other and shrugged, maybe a little disappointed with the fizzling fuse. After the printouts were distributed, Raj's swift words tumbled out so fast that it was a mystery how he managed to breathe. "Let me tell you a few quick things." Larry tried taking notes but stopped when his pen went off the edge of the page onto the table. Then all he could do was stare in amazement. Maybe Raj could breathe in through his nose and speak out through his mouth at the same time. Whatever he did, Raj needed to be careful not to let those eyes pop out of their sockets. No group discussions. The members around the table with their writing hands frozen in midair watched Raj. Nobody was able to digest what could only be described as an auctioneer lecturer. A few times Tara tried to ask questions, even looked around for a sign with a number on it to hold up. Raj did not slow down, so she decided to wait for the man to run out of air. When the cuckoo clock chimed again, he finally slowed, and Tara asked, "What do we have to offer any big-time author to come to our conference?" The room became silent as everyone watched Helen dance her fingers to the clock's melody and hum along, moving her head from side to side. After the tune finished, no long explanation emerged. Raj just answered Tara's question with one word: money. She was stunned at his short answer and took a few seconds to respond. "Where do we get the money?" When Raj's long answer began once again, everyone started complaining without faltering. The president's lips curled as he swatted toward the talking heads. The imaginary mallet smacked each head until the crowd went silent. He smiled and brushed off his hands. "Good. Now, Raj, continue." He looked at the edge of the table and wondered if tickets would start trickling out, as though he'd won a prize. Without missing a beat, Raj said, "The money will come in once we get the big name. We must have the money first to pay this mystery person to show up." Tara kept on the attack. With clenched fists, Raj stood, looked around for help, and pouted, unsure what to do like a cat in a mirror maze. "It must be done my way, or else it won't work." He paced a few times, grabbed his papers, and without further comment, left the house. "Well, that went well." A weak smile formed on the president's face, and then he chuckled. "Club conference will be old business next meeting." He checked off that item on the agenda. Brent sighed louder than he wanted to and said, "Conference was old business from last month." The president shrugged, started to say something, but decided against it. Instead, he said, "Oh, I must mention one more important point about my exciting book. The brain is a resilient organ that has unlimited resources." Without saying a word, Helen left, one more meeting casualty. After drinks were finished with one gulp, and without acknowledging the speaking president, everyone left the table and headed outside. Training the mind is as easy as, well, keeping an audience interested in a complex subject. He chuckled to himself since the room was cleared of all participants. Once the president joined everyone in the front yard, he said to Tara, "We need more members participating." "Yeah, I don't know why more club members don't come to the board meetings." "Exactly. What's their problem? The tasks are easy. Just be glad we don't live in California. Could you imagine? Yeah, all those crazy people. We would never accomplish anything." They chuckled, shrugged, and strolled to their separate vehicles.